The Great Smoky Mountains National Park has many strange and scary mysteries. In today's video, we'll talk about 5 creepy encounters with the supernatural and unknown. Before we start, make sure to hit the subscribe button. The first story comes from Scott. He and his girlfriend went for a camping trip in the Lindcamp Falls area in the Great Smoky Mountain National Forest. It was a remote area with thick woods and a stream running through it. One night after finishing dinner, they heard a long, mournful howl that seemed to come from all directions. It was unlike anything they had ever heard before. The howl resonated in Scott's chest, and his girlfriend was scared to death. They went into their tent, trying to stay calm. They heard something heavy moving around outside their tent. Scott went out with a flashlight but found no tracks, only a foul smell of rotting flesh and sulfur. They were terrified and spent the night listening to the heavy movement around their tent. In the morning they packed up and left, never to return. Let's get more serious here. Our next story was submitted by Damien. In August of 2012, Damien was working as a seasonal employee park ranger at the Deep Creek Campground in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It was right around midnight when he left to drive back to his home on the other side of the park. He had taken this route many times before, and it is usually very dark with only sparse lighting. However, on this night the moon was out and very full, so visibility was much better than usual. As he's driving down Deep Creek Road, which takes you south into Bryson City, something caught his eye up ahead, near some trees on the side of the road, by an old picnic table that has since been removed due to age and rot. At first, Damien thought it might be a bear because there are black bears all over the South. But then he realized how oddly shaped it was compared to a normal black bear, especially standing upright like this one did. What he estimated was a creature that stood about 7 to 8 feet tall, with what appeared to be long flowing black hair covering its entire body except for its face, which appeared more human-like than anything else, although it was hard to tell from the angle he was at and the lighting conditions he was in. Its arms were not as large as you would expect from an animal of this size, but instead more thin and lanky, with very long bony fingers. Damien only saw it for about 10 seconds as he continued driving, but that was enough time to give him a very eerie feeling in the pit of his stomach and make him wonder exactly what he had just seen. As soon as he got home, he told his wife about what had happened. At first, like usual, she seemed very skeptical until he went on to describe exactly what he had seen in more detail. Although she didn't mention Bigfoot or Sasquatch, because she doesn't really know much about them, she thought that it was very possible that's what it could have been. For a long time, Damien had a really hard time accepting this and processing this experience until he got to talk to some other persons working in the park about similar sightings. One of the staff, specifically someone to whom he became very close while they worked, detailed several sightings that she had had while working within the park herself. This really opened Damien's eyes to the fact that this area is probably more active with these kinds of creatures than he had ever imagined. Since then, he has become a believer and is convinced that whatever he saw was most likely a Sasquatch of some kind. The first sighting his coworker described to him was back in 1998 at the Deep Creek area, where she too saw a large bipedal creature moving across the road in front of her vehicle while she was driving. Since then, she has had several other sightings within the park and along nearby roads. Both areas are very close to one another, as well as the setting location that Damien had, which makes him feel even more certain that this is a hotspot for these creatures. But the creature he saw, unlike his coworkers, was not as big and bulky. Although tall, it was more thin and slender. The creature she had seen she described as more apish looking, while the one he had seen, although more slender and tiny, seemed more human in appearance. Both Damien and his coworker have seen a multitude of black bears in the area many times before. Damien describes not hearing any sounds as this thing moved across the road in front of him, but he also noted that the engine kind of drowned out any other noise along with the radio. However, a putrid odor filled the cabin of his vehicle. It was a putrid odor of rotting meat and urine, as Damien described it. His co-worker had had another encounter with one of these things in 2006, when she too was driving down a similar road during the summer in the early evening hours. She saw a large upright creature like the previous creature she had seen and what Damien had seen, upright standing on hind legs next to the road near a tree. She described this one as being around 8 feet tall, gray, with a large head, shoulders, long arms, and virtually no neck. Unlike the first one, she said this one's build was much larger. While she actually suspects the first creature she saw to be a female judging by its shape and figure, this one was obviously a male, judging by its muscle definition and its overall body shape. Unlike the first encounter, this one seemed to act aggressively towards her, and she said that it actually took a few steps toward her car as if it was getting ready to do a bluff charge. She described it as very intense, very frightening, and very aggressive. Since then, Damien has heard of other sightings in and around the area, but couldn't recall any off the top of his head. There is also a Native American tribe reservation nearby, not too far, and they have also reported sightings in that area. Each tribe has many stories of their own. In fact, they might be the best people to go to for stories just like this one. So what do you think? Did Damien and his co-worker truly see something out of this world? Or is this simply 3 misidentifications of a black bear? I'll let you decide. Our next story comes from Kyle. Before he details his own experience with the unknown, he wished to keep his name private, so we'll call him Kyle for the story. In 2016, Kyle worked as a park ranger in the Great Smokey Mountain National Park for about 7 months during the spring and summer. If you don't know much about this park, it's a very large area with many different sections, filled with various types of trees and plants and plenty of wildlife. Kyle worked in one of these smaller sections right around Cades Cove, actually. It's a very popular area for tourists and hikers, and he worked in the visitor center, which is located along a small mountain road. The area has plenty of hiking trails, cabins, and campgrounds. The area can also be secluded with thick trees, shrubbery, and bushes. There are plenty of small roads that lead to dead ends or small hidden cabins. The area is very beautiful, but also has a dark side that Kyle assures not too many people know about. It's home to plenty of black bears and other wildlife, and it's not too uncommon to hear of hikers or tourists having run-ins with large black bears, but most just ignore them. He's also heard stories from other rangers and visitors who have had run-ins with strange creatures. However, what he encountered this evening in the spring was not a bear, and he still has no explanation for what it was. He was working the evening shift, which is always very slow. It's a good time to relax and listen to music while you take in the views of the mountains and trees. One of his favorite times to work was during this evening because it was so peaceful and quiet. On this particular night, he decided to take a walk down one of the smaller roads to clear his head, listening to the sounds of the nightlife while taking in the fresh air and sights around him. It's during these moments that Kyle always felt at peace. As he was walking down the road, taking in everything around him, his peaceful walk was suddenly interrupted by a loud growling noise coming from the bushes next to him. He stops, looks around, but could not see what was making the noise. However, what it sounded like was big enough to devour him whole, he claims. So he slowly backs away from the bushes while keeping his eyes on them. As he did so, something flies up out of the thicket near up in a tree, and what his eyes saw appeared to be a giant bat of some kind. However, once perched, it looked down on him with hideous glowing eyes and a beak-like face. He's never felt such evil overcome his entire being. This thing was not of this world, he claims. Kyle says that this was around 5 feet tall, covered in dark brown, gangly matted fur with a wingspan of around 8 to 10 feet. The face looked like that of a bat or a pterosaur of some kind, but far more demonic with a long curved beak. Its eyes were glowing yellow, and it had a hideous beak-like mouth. It simply sat there and watched him with this evil grin on its face. Kyle, surprised and unsure of what to do next, slowly backs away from the creature while keeping his eyes locked onto it. It was as if something was taunting him to come closer. He doesn't know how long this encounter lasted because when you're in the throes of it, time slows down to a halt. But once he had created enough distance between him and this creature, it simply vanished into the trees and was gone just like that. Once he knew it was clear, he ran back to the visitor center, trying his best to keep a professional composure, which wasn't exactly easy. He told his coworkers about what happened, but they all laughed at him and thought he was crazy. He still doesn't know to this day what it was that was out there or where it had come from, and it's still hands down one of the most terrifying moments in his life, and he will never forget it. Since then, he's tried to do research during his time, and has not been able to come to any rational or logical conclusions as to what this could be, simply because there are a myriad of species of bats living within Tennessee. But what he saw was no ordinary bat. This thing was easily the size of a man with large wings and a hideous face. That was enough for Kyle to move on from that encounter and try to forget about it altogether.